This is Jim Fetzer welcoming you to a real deal interview with my candidate for the most interesting man in the world, Greg Hallett. It's a real pleasure to have another opportunity to interview Greg. I was recently contacted by a party keenly interested in a work of his entitled How to Take Over the World, a Right Royal Con. Greg had mixed feelings about the party contacting me, but it seemed like a perfect occasion to get an update from his side of the world. Greg, how are you, my friend?
All right. I've got a bit of a summer cold, so if I break out in sneezes, it's my fault.
You might want to up your volume just a tad, if you can.
Yeah, see, what's happened is I've just had another keyboard attack, another one. So this is the third keyboard in 5 months. Right?
Ridiculous.
I've had this brand new for 5 months, and spacebar's not working. All the bottom right-hand corner buttons aren't working, and the volume up isn't working. Volume down's working.
That sounds like a sabotage to me, Greg. I mean, these keyboards are trivial.
Yeah, and then you say let's do an interview in an hour and a half, and then all of a sudden, I just half an hour later, for the last hour, I just get bombarded with Facebook posts and reposts and friend requests, and they just lay it on. They know exactly what's happening when it's happening, because they're completely tuned into your microphone.
Well, tell me a bit about How to Take Over the World, Greg. That seems to be a popular item. I went on to Amazon looking for it, but amazingly enough, it's unavailable.
Yeah. Well, they're trying to make all of my work unavailable because it's true and it's direct. It's to the point. And you can tell that something's true if it is future-proofed. So what I was saying 12 years ago is now on everyone's lips, although the book was largely suppressed, right? So if we look at the forward, so I've got the title page, and then I've got dedication, preface, and then I've got a letter to the Queen, and then the contents, right? So opposite the contents is letter to the Queen, 1st of January 2007, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Buckingham Palace, London, SW1A, 1AA, England.
Do you want to do a screen share so you can show us what you have there? By the way, the volume has gone up and it's excellent.
Yeah, I didn't touch anything. So yeah, we could try that. Where's the screen share? Share. Try that. Are we on? Can you see that?
Yeah, it's coming up. There it is.
Okay. So let's see if I can.
Yeah, very good.
Dear Your Majesty the Queen, this is 1st of January 2007, so this is 12 and a half years ago. Dear Your Majesty the Queen, the history you have presented to the public is bunkum. This bunkum history is now being maintained. This bunkum history has been maintained by your historians in exchange for cover over their sexual indiscretions. We once swore an oath of loyalty to you and stood for your image and anthem in picture theatres. Those days went out with the afro. We now believe you have been criminally advised and your family is built on the crimes hiding behind your image. Never has a bigger criminal existed than your family over its generations. I regret to point out that everything about you has failed. Your marriage, your children's marriages, those of your ancestors, and your rule. You are part of a family occupying a country you have no right to occupy, other than via rights stolen through murder by your forebears. From the study of history, I have come to the conclusion that you should be exiled from England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Your only place of refuge should be the biographical encyclopedia, A History of Occultists. Yours sincerely, Greg Hallett.
That's quite a fine statement, my friend.
Stop share. Yeah, so that's proved to be, pretty entirely accurate.
You could go back to the contents page and give us a thumbnail sketch of each of the chapters.
Yeah, I could. But the Spy Master was also very keen on that letter. He initiated the idea and contributed to it. But, he worked under the Queen, and so it's also from the Spy Master to the Queen. So that it contains first-hand knowledge. Yeah. Yeah, well, what's happened is you've had Professor George Lees contact you and say he wants to do an interview with you, and he wants to discuss how to take over the world, right, rule, con, and he wants me to give you a full PDF of my book, which you would then give to him so that he can discuss it. Now, George Lees pretends to be some sort of authority on me. He's actually he's on the Israeli SPA program. He's actually a very dull Mossad asset, right? And part of the role of the agents is to completely erode the income of people and completely erode their identity and completely erode their work. So George Lees, I've never met him. He's never met me. He's never purchased one of my books, but he pretends to be an authority on me. So what I did when I was promoting How to Take Over the World, Right, Rule, Con back in 2007, I copied, like, let's say pages 1 to 20 and pages 40 to 60 and pages 100 to 120 and put them out so that people could get a gist of what the book was about. And he then read it and took it to be interesting, but a bit disjointed. Because there was 20 pages missing, 40 pages missing, 60 pages missing, but he couldn't read the page numbers, right? Nevertheless, having read like less than 20% of a PDF and never having purchased one of my books, he was an authority on me. So as he's on the Israeli SPA program, so his role as a certified mental patient, that's why he was accessed by Israel, is to promote my work, but get key elements wrong and key elements ambiguous, and then add a whole lot of stuff on the end, which is his research, which is non-research, which is not crucial and even off topic. And it's designed, and the way he speaks, it's designed to bore people out of any interest on the initial work, which is my work. Right? You can see how it works.
Well, Greg, that's a fascinating intro to a closely related subject when you suggest he's part of a Mossad operation, because as you well know, Jeffrey Epstein has now been arrested and charged. We have a report that he may have been assaulted or sought to commit suicide, which I find most unlikely since he appears to be a classic narcissist, or persons who are in love with themselves very rarely seek to do themselves in. I would be fascinated by your take about, Little St. James Island. He suggested he'd like to rename it Little St. Jeff. The guy who was his IT guy for around 10 years said he was a fanatic about getting good audio and video all over the island, clearly for blackmail purposes. I think you're probably as well positioned as anyone in the world to comment on the scheme entire that was taking place here.
Yeah, well, they do it on all levels. I think Jeffrey Epstein is as a Mossad agent blackmailing politicians just from the beginning, but he's done it in conjunction with the Clintons. So the Clintons have also been blackmailing all the politicians, including all the bankers. And I've just listened to an article today where the Clintons stole 3,500 tons of gold out of the Philippines by replacing it with titanium coated in gold, and then having the real gold purported to be the titanium, but having the real gold then stolen and distributed through deep state in America. And Trump's just taken some of that back, which is good. So, with the George Lees thing, where, it's small fry stuff, but it is attacking a big story. And the big story that I've been touting is that the British royal family are flatline royal, which means they're illegitimate, and they have been since 1840. They've been illegitimate. So and we've got the royal marks for the throne. So Israel obviously wants to put in agents to erode that message. And George Lees has been under psychiatric supervision since 2011, and he's actually lost his professorship. It's been taken off him. Right, so he's just George Lees. He's not Professor George Lees, and he's of no fixed abode and lives in and out of his car. Right, so you've got this, and then what happens is that Israel takes him on a spy program as soon as he's done enough damage for a while on people, basically assassinating their profile and assassinating their knowledge. George Lees gets on a spy program and goes for a holiday. And so George Lees is the Scottish pikey, and there's also the Welsh pikey, the English pikey, the Irish pikey, the Australian pikey, the New Zealand pikey, and the American pikey, and an Argentinian pikey, right? So these are all pikeys, right? And the way that they're mind controlled is by various different means. Some of them have an altar that will do assassinations that appear to be an accident, and they won't quite remember doing it. They kind of do, and if you're lucky enough, you can actually find some physical evidence of them doing it. But these people are in denial of reality, and they have no remorse. So if you pull them up and say stuff like, you know, which I've pointed out with George Lees, he's got no remorse, which is a sign of insanity, really. It's a sign of a psychosis and schizophrenia. I pointed out that he'd taken over my Facebook page and put his identity on my Facebook page and said that I, Greg Hallett, went to Kelso High School, and then I couldn't change it. I could access my page, but I couldn't change any of my Facebook, which indicates that he had some Israeli program behind him. And then George Lees then checked with Kelso High School to see if Greg Hallett went to Kelso High School. He checked with the administration, and the administration told George Lees that Greg Hallett didn't go to Kelso High School, but George Lees did.
Greg, not to to a rather larger story, but the testimony of Robert Mueller before the Congress appears to have massively backfired. He appeared to be doddering, incompetent, didn't know his own report. He asked to repeat the question, explained he didn't know. He deferred answering questions like 200 times. I think it was a shattering experience for the Democrats, who had the illusion that he was going to hold the key to an impeachment proceeding against the sitting president. This all now appears to have been exposed as a sham. I very much like your commentary on the whole history of the Russia hoax.
Wow, okay. Well, Trump's actually a very smart boy. He's very good at 5D chess. And he's got a very good memory, and he's been in the government and military and intelligence system on the fringes, socializing with them all for many decades. So like he said himself, he actually knows how it's run, but he also knows how to undo it and how to get the deep state swamp to drain itself. Right?
That requires a great deal of political genius and insight, by the way. So you're really attributing to him some very powerful virtues intellectually.
Yeah, and I think the last person that really tried this was perhaps Reagan, right? And then JFK before that. Now, the problem with Reagan is that his wife, Nancy Reagan, was kind of working against him. She was controlling Ronald, and when the mafia wanted to get access to Ronald Reagan, Nancy Reagan demanded that she have sex with and dance with
Frank Sinatra.
Frank Sinatra, right? Which actually formed into a relationship such that Ronald Reagan had trouble breaking them up on the ballroom floor, right? So the mafia were really sort of controlling Reagan, and since from Reagan's office on, the mafia have actually had rooms in the White House, right? They actually have their own rooms and they have pseudo titles. And in smaller countries, when they go to the White House and sign documents, they're often signing documents with the mafia and not with the president, right? So when the Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, Winston Peters, goes to the White House, he actually signs over another aspect of New Zealand to the mafia, not to President Trump or White House for America, right? So the mafia is infiltrated somewhere between 1/4 and 3/4 of the White House and US government, right? So Trump has a massive deep state to drain and to try and get it to collapse onto itself. And he appears to be doing a good job, and it should all fall like dominoes. And when it does fall, we'll realize what life should be like and what we've been missing. Right?
Well, it's just stunning, the degree of corruption and the extent to which it's revolved around blackmail for sexual indiscretions, to child sex acts, and even human sacrifice, including cannibalism, which I believe has been sufficiently well documented that I say with a high degree of confidence that this has been going on. It now appears for a couple of decades, where the Clintons, John Podesta, and others have played a key role. Hillary more so than Bill.
Well, I think equally it's just that Hillary's been at the forefront recently because she's had the latest role, but I think they're equally literally terrible. And they're pretty much, the Clintons and Bushes have been pretty much terraforming Earth. And I mean terror as in Terror. Yeah, terraforming Earth through terror, not Terra. And they've changed the whole socio-political landscape, so that we almost sit on the edge, bored, waiting for the next false flag so that we can jump into expected terror. You know, we've been programmed to expect terror about every 3 months. No?
Is that roughly the cycle you would estimate, about 4 times a year that they want to have these operations to manipulate the public by faux acts of terrorism? Of course, they can intersperse real bona fide. 9/11 obviously caused real deaths, real destruction, but it was orchestrated by the CIA, the neocons in the Department of Defense, most of whom were dual U.S.-Israeli citizens, and the Mossad, to draw the U.S. into the Middle East to take out the modern Arab states that had served as a counterbalance to Israel's domination of the entire region, and eventually to confront the Persian nation of Iran, efforts that go on to this day.
Yeah. The destabilization of the Middle East was a purposeful program. Now, all of this can only happen because the person at the top of it, which is the figurehead at the top, which is Queen Elizabeth II, she's flatline royal. She's a fraud. She's not the daughter of King George VI, and everyone in power knows it. And all of the notaries in the United Kingdom know that Elizabeth is not the Queen, right? Now, if we had a true monarch on the British throne, then we would have some integrity. But what we do have is an extorted monarch who isn't the Queen, so much so that the Freemasons themselves stole the coronation stone on Christmas Day 1950 at 4 a.m. so that Elizabeth's coronation would not be true, because they knew that we were the true royal family, right? So this has been going on for close to 70 years now. And if Elizabeth was a true monarch, she would have sat on the coronation stone when she was crowned. She wasn't, she didn't. And then the London Gazette fraudulently registered Elizabeth as Queen. And to do that, they actually had to backdate it. It should have been like number 11, and they backdated it to number 9, and then manipulated the other 2 items, right? So it was put in out of order, and then the actual number on the document was altered as well. So it's put out of order to show that it was fraudulent, and the person who put it out of order inserted it because the true people knew that it was fake, was Elizabeth's natural father, who was Winston Churchill. He did it from the War Office, from Whitehall. Right, so what we've got is a fraudulently registered, illegitimate entity, non-princess, as queen in a fake ceremony with fake registration, who has 4 children to 3 different fathers. Now, all of this actually fulfills all of the prophecy. This is all fulfillment of prophecy. And what we're in now is a non-reality. And we're in a non-reality because the people we look up to and the people we swear oaths to are not the people we consider them to be. Right? So we're in a black as white, white as black situation.
Greg, let me ask this. How is the Queen and the royal family related to the Rothschild's empire? It must be a very tight, intimate relationship, but I don't know that I've ever heard you expound upon it. Could you elaborate?
Yeah. I believe that Queen Elizabeth II is 3/16 Rothschild, so it's almost a quarter Rothschild. So Queen Victoria was half Rothschild. Edward VII was 3/4 Rothschild. George V was not Rothschild. And then George VI was not Rothschild. And then Queen Elizabeth II, her father Winston Churchill, was 3/4 Rothschild or 3/8 Rothschild. Let me see. So there's 3/4, 3/8. Yeah. So Winston Churchill was 3/8 Rothschild. So Elizabeth is 3/16 Rothschild. Right. So she's almost a quarter Rothschild. And they just dictate everything because the British royal family is actually bankrupt. So every year they have to go to the British government and say, can you give us $500 million to do up our palace and take care of our servants for the year? And they take about £1 billion pounds a year in funding because they're bankrupt, right? And all they do in exchange is wage, And they're a mafia family. They're absolutely a mafia family. Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip are the biggest heroin traffickers in the world. And it's called the Queen's heroin, and no one was allowed to be charged for the Queen's heroin. Plus, they've been kind of convicted of stealing about 20, 40, 60, 80 Canadian school children and perhaps having sex with them and murdering them. They've never been seen again. And they've been convicted of that in absentia by passive acquiescence and cognitive avoidance. So they refused to acknowledge the papers. And it was a reasonably legitimate common law act by more than 20 people. So let's say 24 plus 1 people. So, and we actually own the caduceus to trade as the monarch of the United Kingdom. Right? So Elizabeth can't actually trade as a monarch. And they know that. And I've got a letter from Queen Victoria saying assemble and claim it. And also the Magna Carta is fake. There's 4 legitimate copies, 4 certified copies of the Magna Carta and no original that it is a copy of. Right? So what happens with the US Constitution is it mentions the Magna Carta, but the Magna Carta is not certified. King John I didn't sign it in 1215, and he didn't seal it either. So that means that the Magna Carta is made up, which means that the US Constitution is based on something that's made up, right? And the only person who can certify the Magna Carta is the next King John. So we had Prince Marcus Manuel, who's King John II of the United Kingdom, 1869 to 1910, and we've got the next King John III of the United Kingdom, Great Britain and all Ireland, which I'm saying is me. right? And I've got all the paperwork and experiences and marks for that. And I don't seem to be getting challenged over it. You know, I put out the challenges for it. I'm saying, you know, here, Queen Elizabeth II, here's the challenge, you know, come and respond. And because of my status, the rules of the game is that she can't say anything against me. So because you've got a fake Queen and you've got a fake US Constitution, you've got a fake Magna Carta, therefore you've got fake common law, right? So it requires someone to come in on the predictions. It's like a prediction highway. It's got all these predictions, yeah. And someone's got to come in and write on all of those predictions and come in and say, okay, look, this is the way I can certify the Magna Carta and therefore bring in common law and therefore common rights and therefore a certified Constitution of the United States for the benefit of the people.
Greg, we've discussed this many times. What would it take for you to receive formal recognition of your role in history?
The fulfillment of predictions, and that's actually happening. That is, it's unfolding as we speak, and a lot of the stuff that you're watching Trump do, draining the swamp, I've actually initiated in many ways. Because, like in that book, How to Take Over the World, a Right Royal Con, and others 2 years earlier, I published that Prince Philip and Lord Louis Mountbatten were heroin traffickers and pedophiles. Right, so, and a lot of the stuff we're looking at now is that the hoi polloi are actually heroin traffickers, drug traffickers, pedophiles, and arms dealers, right? And they're not actually royalty either, right? Royalty don't act like that.
Now, you're suggesting that the present royal family is very much under the control of the Rothschilds. Muammar Gaddafi, of course, once famously observed that if you want to add terrorism around the world, all you have to do is to lob a cruise missile into the city of London. What are your thoughts or reflections on his observation?
Yeah, especially Bank in London, because the Rothschilds really own the Bank of England, which is in Bank in London. And that's where the Battle of Waterloo was won from, and that's where they used to have carrier pigeons in 1814. The carrier pigeons, new species was brought in called homing pigeons, and they were actually trained from 1814 to fly from Waterloo to Bank in London. And then a year later, they had the battle, which just happened to be at Waterloo, 1 kilometre from where the homing pigeons were trained to fly from. And the Rothschilds flew the message from Waterloo on their new homing pigeons to Bank in London. And that was an act of terrorism, and that gave the Rothschilds the breeding rights to the British royal family. But kind of in parallel with this, when I went to Bank in early May 2012 to the Bank of England, there was a photographer there, and he asked to photograph me for the Bank of England brochure. By the time I had black curly hair and a big beard, I was all a bit overgrown, you know. Haircut was about 3 haircuts behind, same with the beard. But they wanted to photograph me for their brochure, where I didn't look like a respectable person at all. So why would the Bank of England want to photograph me for their brochure? Maybe they just wanted photographs of me, you know?
Yes.
Kind of interesting.
For the Rogues Gallery, an updated photograph of Greg Hallett.
The guy who fulfills all these predictions, you know, right down to the color of my skin, the color of my hair, color of my feet, shape of my legs, you know, everything's been predicted. And I've fulfilled all of these predictions, so they know it's happening. And I'm just sitting here watching all these predictions have fruit, you know what I mean? And I'm just watching Trump do his work. He's just fantastic what he's doing. I think it's great. I think he's doing a brilliant program.
I'm very impressed too. It appears to me that the royal family must have the same sort of apprehensions about you as the Democrats have about Donald Trump. And in fact, there are a whole host of scalawags in the United States who are fearful that Trump is actually going to succeed at his enterprise. When you talk of draining the swamp, it's such a massive undertaking. But from your observations, I think you're suggesting he's actually very well positioned to carry it out.
Oh, he's perfectly positioned, and he's perfectly trained, you know, in putting himself in an experiences way for the last 4 decades. And he's brilliant at it. So, you know, I fully commend him. Now, one of the things that you know, I sort of said that I represented the end times New Age and was asking for confirmation. So what Trump did on the 3rd of June when he's flying into London, is he flew directly over here. Not sure if I told you this. And then he drops down to half speed and drops down to 1,150 feet over the top of me. And then that was at 8:45 a.m. 3rd of June. And then 4 hours later, Queen Elizabeth flies a British Royal Air Force A330 plane in a crossway, exactly the other way, and also drops down to half speed and 1,150 feet. And I've got that on video. So they marked me on the 3rd of June, where Trump was dominating Buckingham Palace and then going to France for D-Day. And I'd written a book with the second commander of Operation James Bond, who was the decoy for D-Day, right? And he had his testicles connected to a battery and he's tortured for a couple of weeks, and then he finally gave up the location, but he'd been given the wrong location. So, you know, that's how D-Day worked. So what happened then is the British Royal Air Force plane went out 30 miles to the coast and then another 30 miles out into the English Channel and flew a paperclip 3 times, right, out in the sea. And that paperclip covered 570 square miles, and I'm 57. And my great-grandfather, Ernest Robert Godwood, had invented the hair clip, which is the forerunner to the paperclip. And when he was a scientist in New York in 1936, and he's recognized as the world's foremost authority in the combustion engine in the 1930s. So the Nazis stole him before the war and took him to Germany to back engineer some advanced technology that they had, which resulted in the Foo Fighter in 1939. So what happened was they acknowledged that, and then the 3rd of June was, I'll introduce it this way. When they changed the time over from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, it was on the 14th of September, 1752, which is my birthday. 14th September, Gregorian is my name, right? And when I represented the End Times New Age on the 16th of August, 2014, to the 3rd of June, 2019, is exactly the same number, 1,752 days, right? 1752 days, yeah? So they were acknowledging that I represented the End Times New Age. Now, the person who represents the End Times New Age is automatically the King of England.
It's absolutely fascinating, Greg, how many roads lead to the throne. It's just astonishing for anyone who's followed your work and your research and the detail with which you are able to articulate the findings and confirmation that this is indeed the case. It's just astonishing.
Yeah. Well, what I did is I'm 45 days before, so the 15th of May, I was doing an interview, I think it was Matrix 2 in America, and I said, look, I've got all these titles and I've actually got this position, and it's been confirmed by all of these people. And if I'm not it, you know, I give you guys 6 weeks, I give you 45 days to come up with someone else who has this permission, or it's me, this position, or it's me. And instead of coming up with someone else, they confirmed me 18 days later, you know. So they're really pushing it, you know. Queen Elizabeth II is absolutely pushing it. She knows that that I've got the role, so she keeps marking me into the role of monarch of the United Kingdom. And she knows that her 3 sons are just, she's given up on them, right? So Prince Charles, Prince Philip said about Prince Charles was born a girl and Princess Anne was born a boy. Right, and the predictions say that the Queen of Babylon, which means London, so the Queen of London, which means Elizabeth, that she will give birth to a man-child. And so Princess Anne is basically a man, she's got a male sex drive. And Prince Andrew is Lord Porchester's son, and he's now up on charges of, or allusions to charges of pedophilia. Prince Charles's closest friend was the main pedophile in Britain. Prince Philip was a pedophile, and Prince Edward is a convicted pedophile. He's convicted in New Zealand of pedophilia. Right? Not many people know that. So Queen Elizabeth has a husband who's a pedophile. She's been indicted as a pedophile in Canada, and her three sons, Charles, Andrew, and Edward, are all pedophiles.
Greg, it just blows me away. I did an interview with Jim Rothschild, who is a Gold Shield NYPD detective who cracked many pedophile cases only to find the district attorney in New York refused to prosecute, suppressing them on political grounds. When the NYPD came into the possession of Anthony Weiner's laptop and lots of salacious stories were emerging, I shared them with him and asked if he were at all surprised, and he said no, because based upon his experience, 70% of the American political elite is engaged in pedophilia. Frankly, I've never understood the attraction. I don't begin to grasp what's going on here. I'd appreciate any reflections or elucidation you might be able to provide.
Well, I published in 2005 that Prince Philip and Lord Mountbatten were pedophiles, and they were also involved in heroin trafficking. So pedophilia and heroin trafficking often go hand in hand. And the heroin was known as the Queen's heroin, and no one could be charged for the heroin. So what happened is the pedophiles wanted to be part of the heroin trafficking with Prince Philip, because then they would get protection for their pedophilia. So we've got pedophiles in New Zealand like the homosexual Peter Aldridge Williams QC, who was president of the Law Society. He was a pedophile. He asked me to watch a pedophile video with him, and then went and reneged on it, when I showed no interest. And he was the main heroine.
That was obviously a form of entrapment, Greg. You would have been videoed watching the video.
Yeah, it was actually the New Zealand SIS that had cameras all over the place inside. And he and Peter Williams didn't know that the SIS and his best friends in the SIS were actually videoing Peter Williams watching child porn movies.
Really disgraceful.
They used to get this guy called Lennox, who's an expert bank robber, car breaker, house breaker, safe breaker, and he could break into any of those things and then close it up and leave it so that there was no damage and no one would recognize that anyone had been there. So Lennox actually broke into Peter Williams' safe and found $1.5 million in heroin money in the safe. Right? And Peter Williams admitted to me in the High Court and to the judge that Peter Williams was Prince Philip's agent in New Zealand. So there you've got heroin trafficking and pedophilia going hand in hand. And the triumvirate was run by Prince Philip, Lord Mountbatten, Lord Porchester, and Lord Plunkett. And the triumvirate were the heroin traffickers of the Queen's heroin. And Queen Elizabeth II is the heroin trafficking mole, and she'd have sex with everyone in the triumvirate, right? So Lord Porchester had sex with Queen Elizabeth II over the heroin and produced Prince Andrew, who's a pedophile, and then Lord Plunkett had sex with Queen Elizabeth II over the heroin and produced Prince Edward, who's a pedophile.
Greg, we've recently done a story about New Zealand and the wholly contrived mass shootings there. I thought your observations were brilliant, identifying the weapons as toy guns. You even located where they could be obtained. You have CGI for the shell ejections, which disappear in the air, never hit the ground. You have shotgun blasts in the doorway, and there's no blood, and no mayhem, no body parts. He walks into a large room, and the bodies are already stacked up before he fires a shot. I thought you did as brilliant a dissection of the Christchurch shooting as anyone has presented, and yet it's been challenged by figures like this Max Egan, who insists that we're all wrong about this, that it was real and bona fide. One of my research colleagues, Mona Alexis Presley, took him to task for claiming 4 specific examples that were supposed to prove it was authentic, and she demonstrated that all 4 of them were shams, phonies, and frauds themselves. raising serious questions about his role in the broader scheme entire. I'd be fascinated to get your reflections. The whole business intended to motivate, a drastic surrender of guns has been an abject failure of over 15 million, 1,000,005 weapons in the country, like 350 have been turned in. I mean, it's going nowhere. The Kiwis are as wise about keeping their weapons as I believe are Americans, because similar efforts here have been likewise abject failures.
Yeah. Well, my view on Max Egan is that he is the Australian pikey and the group of pikeys, and he worked with Ken O'Keefe, who's the American pikey, and they went to Israel under the guise of helping the Palestinians, but exposed all of the Palestinian tunnels, about 100 of them, which were then closed down. And when the photographer was shot, it's my understanding from the dynamics of it, excuse me, that Ken O'Keefe shot the photographer.
That's terrible.
And then to support him, the Mossad put out a very, very bad video of Mossad descending down ropes, purportedly from a helicopter onto a ship. The whole thing was so blurred, it was like someone made up a cardboard stage.
Ken O'Keefe was supposed to have disarmed several of the commandos. Yeah, he was hailed as a hero as a consequence.
Yeah, if you look at Ken O'Keefe, that's how strong he is. He's a skinny, weedy guy, weighs about 8 stone. He's got no strength at all. He's got no fighting ability. He's all mouth,
Well, it's very disturbing to me because in 2010 at Friend's house in London, I organized a symposium on debunking the war on terror, where Kevin Barrett and Gillett Otzman were speakers, but where Ken O'Keefe, who was in the vicinity at the time, was my master of ceremonies. And to hear these stories of him and his girlfriend absconding with money that had been contributed, I believe, to the Palestinians, I have found dumbfounding.
Yeah. What he's done is he's got about $1,500 US a month donated to him, and he says, "I'll make a video when that reaches 2,000 a month." So he's taken all this money. He took about 130,000 US, and he got some Asian hooker, and he just went around the world in hotels with this Asian hooker. And then when the money ran out, she left, and there was no research. The whole thing's a fraud. He's a charity fraudster. Ken O'Keefe is a charity fraudster. So the other people, so you've got Mark Windows as the London gatekeeper. He's actually the Welsh pikey. He's Welsh. And he's got many aliases, Mark Craythorne, Mark Windsor Craythorne, Mark Windsor, Mark Windows, which is a fake name, and his new name is Mark Alexander Scott. And at the same time he sold me a vehicle that was a death trap, he changed his name and also stole my 4 terabyte hard drive with all of my records of the heroin trafficking in Prince Philip on it.
That's very troubling too, because not only did Ken O'Keefe serve as my master of ceremonies in London, but I've been featured by Mark Windows on his Windows on the World radio show more than once, Greg. I mean, these are all very disturbing reports.
Yeah, well, Mark Windows has an altar that does death by accident. Right? So he's a Satanist as well. So, I was friends with Mark Windows as well. And, he's selling me this vehicle and saying, it's all fine, it's all fine. What? Everything on this list and the MOT's been done. It's all been done, right? And
why was he interviewing me? Did that somehow elevate his credibility with the public?
Well, if you think about it, if he's an agent and he can interview the opposition and have control over that interview somewhat, he's in, in terms of the people he's working for, he's in, he's in. Because he's interviewed Jim Fetzer, right? So you got Mark Windows is hanging around your talk. Admittedly, I'm hanging around your talk, but I'm saying, well, I'll do the intro for you, and you go, no, I want Ken O'Keefe to do it, So Ken O'Keefe stands up on stage before you at Friend's house and starts talking about himself and how wonderful a speaker he is.
it's all profoundly disturbing. I mean, I like to think it's difficult to play me, but I find that on occasions I have been played.
Yeah, but then, you came over from America to do this talk at a friend's house, and then someone didn't do the advertising. Someone passed the advertising on to someone else. It happened to be a Muslim saboteur, but the person who passed it on is actually the person responsible for not getting enough advertising out, so that the whole trip for you to go to the US, basically meet me, shake hands, have lunch, and go home and talk to 20 people cost you.
That was a highlight, actually, Greg. You and me getting together there at that late night at that, was it a Chinese or a Vietnamese restaurant? It was wonderful.
Crystal Palace on.
That was by far the high point of my entire visit to the UK.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. But you see what I'm saying? That drains your resources, right? Now, if they'd done the advertising right, and if you didn't have saboteurs around you, then you could have been going to London to give talks every 2 months and coming out financially on top or even, right? So the way they slap you on the hand is they sabotage it, right? So we've got Mark Windows. He's actually Welsh, right? So but he's the gatekeeper for London because his name's Mark Windsor, right? Mark Windsor. And Mark Windows was a fake name he used for 22 years. And by the way, Mark Windows or Mark Windsor or Mark Alexander Scott or Mark Craythorne, please send me your address for service because I've got all this stuff on basically an assassination attempt from you by selling me a vehicle that was a dangerous vehicle that did actually break up within an hour of driving it, Yeah,
but the attempts on you have been multitudinous. Greg, yeah. You're living a charmed life to have evaded them. I mean, it's stunning.
Tell the girls that. Okay, so Mark Winters is the Welsh pikey. Professor George Lee is no longer professor. He's the Scottish pikey. Sean Maguire is the Irish pikey. He just lets George Lee say whatever he wants about me and misinterpret my work. And there's no comeback for these people. They have no physical address. There's no integrity with them. There's no apology with them. There's no cognizance of doing wrong, right? So they're all sociopaths. John Patterson is the English pikey. Max Egan is the Australian pikey. Ken O'Keefe is the US pikey. Vinnie Eastwood is the New Zealand pikey. And we've got to give credit to the Nazi agent, Countess Lawrence de Mello. She's British Naval counterintelligence in Argentina. She's the Argentinian pikey. And all these people do attacks that really cost you a lot of money, right? So, this American thing cost you, the visit to London cost you, say, $6,000. But their sabotage on me has cost me, if I include the movie rights and the book rights, over £1.1 million.
Wow. Wow.
So, and I've got a good case with sabotage. And if any of them want to challenge me, the first thing they can do is forward their address, plus their lawyer's address, but first their own physical mailing address. I need a proper mailing address. So I keep putting that challenge out, and every time I put it out, I give them 10 days to respond. Give it another 3 days on top of the interview. So what is that today? That is 27 July. So I'll give them to the mid-August, 15th of August, to respond with their address. Otherwise, I will take it as another cognitive avoidance and passive acquiescence to murder and sabotage. Planned murder and sabotage, right? And there's 2 people on that list that have tried to murder me. Yeah, the rest have been sabotaged. Yeah, so what we've got is about 90% of the people on the internet are actually saboteurs and government agents, and they work through various means.
Stunning.
Which you've experienced, point out to you, and you go,
and of course, I'm in the midst of this lawsuit by a man I would describe as a cyber terrorist who calls himself Lenny Posner. He's a fake parent of a phony Sandy Hook victim where they made up the photographs of Noah Posner, who was supposed to have been the youngest of the children killed at Sandy Hook, out of photographs of his older stepbrother when he was a child. Mona's done research, too, that suggests some of the other Sandy Hook parents actually used photographs of themselves when they were children to be their decedents. And they've made out like bandits, Greg, because the sympathetic but gullible Americans have contributed between 27 and $130 million in donations, divided evenly by the 26 allegedly grieving families. That's between $1 and $5 million for having pretended to have lost a child at Sandy Hook.
Well, that's kind of interesting. So let's say I did a reverse false flag, right? So that's a false flag. A false flag is getting 130 million. Let's say it's 100 million for a false flag.
Yeah.
So I'm going to offer the American people a reverse false flag where I legitimize Magna Carta and therefore legitimize the Constitution and therefore legitimize common law. How much are you going to pay me?
A vast sum, I should suggest, my friend, a vast sum.
Well, what I'm suggesting is that we're in a non-reality and false flags raise 100 million and the truth raises
0.
No good deed goes
actually
unpunished.
punished. Lawsuits, attempted assassinations, often successful. Unbelievable.
Yeah, you see what I mean? So I've got the power to correct it all.
I want that to come to pass, my friend.
Yeah, that'd be nice, you know, and where's it all, you know? So one of the things that happened was like, the whole thing is like a tube with all these predictions in it, right? There's like a timeline with all these predictions in it, and you pick up as many predictions as you can, you know, and you're predicted, so you grab it up and you go through and grab off all these predictions, and then you're basically running the show from the point of view of the high orders. So what I did to depower the Catholic Church, I needed to in some way definance the Catholic Church. And in order to do that, I had to separate the money out of the Catholic Church, right? So the way, or the Vatican. So the way I did that is, the prediction was that when the story of Prince Marcos Manuel is published, the Knights of Malta are executed out of the Vatican. And what I've been told since then is that the Knights of Malta are really the ones who are in charge of money on the big global scale. They're in charge of money, right? So what I've done is I've separated the Knights of Malta out of the Vatican, which has left the Vatican a bit isolated, not protected by the world's money. And that's let a lot of things roll.
Well, it seems to me, with all the signs pointed in the right direction, that if you are correct about the development of these events, you may indeed achieve your objective. I mean, the formal recognition of your role in history.
Well, that would be nice. I've just been listening. When you said let's do an interview, I was listening to this thing where the Clintons made 640,000 tungsten gold blanks, right? So the tungsten coated in gold, and they were delivered to Fort Knox, and then the real gold ones were stolen. And then the tungsten bars were sold into the international gold market, traded with China for debt, and then sold into the international gold market, either by America or China. And the Clintons and Federal Reserve banksters defrauded the global market of $600 billion in gold. This is called the Clinton Gold Heist, and it was published in 2004 in the Liberty Beacon. So they shipped it, the Clintons and Obamas shipped the tungsten gold, $600 billion, to China in 2008. China also sent it to the Philippines, where it was stolen, yes, and then given to the deep state. So that'll be the real gold going to the deep state. And then Trump froze the deep state assets in around July 2017. And 3,500 tons of gold were illegally shipped out of the Philippines. And it appears that another 3,500 metric tons of gold of 99.99% pure gold, which is over 150 billion worth, were by Aquino, but like the former president's grandson or son is the ex-president. And this 150 billion worth of gold, 3,500 metric tons, was used to back up 3 trillion of paper currency made of US $100 denominations. And some of the gold went to Spain, and the US $100 denominations, 3 trillion worth, was made under this Sentinel Energy Company in Thailand, which was a subsidiary of the Federal Reserve. Yeah, the Sentinel Energy Company in Thailand was a subsidiary of the Federal Reserve, and the Sentinel Energy Company in Thailand was printing US $100 denominations to the value of 3 trillion. And this was used to crash the little banks in America, little banks around the place, and the petrodollar to move to gold. And so the US was New Zealand, the world's #1 oil producer, and now the biggest gold owner. But the gold owners from this Fort Knox stolen gold was owned by all the deep state people living in places like Miami. What Trump's done is he's frozen all those assets, because it was actually Fort Knox gold that's done this huge loop through the Philippines and Thailand. And that whole thing was done by the Clintons, right? So what's happening, and that's sort of 2014, 2017, and I published in 2014 when the money could get freed up. So what's happening now is that Trump's going after all this black state money that's being moved around, making the black state people rich, and the banks and Federal Reserve, etc., and Fort Knox, supported by tungsten coated in gold. So you can see how it's working. Yeah.
So does U.S. have any bona fide gold reserves at all, or is it all fake?
In Fort Knox, it's fake. Fort Knox is fake, so it's fake gold in there. But trying to slip it back in as real gold before, well, you know, by freezing it out of people's assets in July 2017. He may have slipped it back in.
Trump's plan is to replace the fake gold in Fort Knox with the real gold.
Yeah, I think he might have done that already. Yeah.
That's amazing. You're saying the key to understanding what's going on in the world is not just follow the money, but follow the gold.
Yeah, follow the gold, absolutely. And also follow the codes, you know, or follow the predictions, because all the stuff's been predicted. And I just happen to be the one who's predicted. And I kind of know Trump's role in it. You know, he's very proud, you know, and he deserves to be proud. And, you know, he's brilliantly charismatic, as he's done, you know, the Apprentice and stuff like that. And there's not many people that can carry that off. And I think he actually really enjoys his own failings and finds his own follies as very humorous, even to himself, which is a very good sign of mental health.
Yeah, he's a genius at public relations. I think you're right. I think he's very self-aware and has a sense of humor about his own foibles. I agree completely.
Yeah, yeah. And so he's trying to get rid of the whole deep state out of the White House. And, you know, there's mafia in the White House that have their own offices, and I think they will start to scuttle out like rats and mice, and actually just take the labels off the doors and clear out of their offices and just walk out, rather than face the music of a military court-martial. Now, when you've got the New Zealand Deputy Prime Minister, who was my neighbour when I was growing up, he used to follow me around, a guy called Winston Peters. He was the heroin trafficking partner of Peter Williams. And when Peter Williams was dying, Winston Peters was at his deathbed. Now, Winston Peters, when he goes to the White House and has meetings in the White House on behalf of New Zealand, Winston Peters is meeting with the mafia, not with the White House. And he's signing documents with the mafia, all right? So he might come along, he might return to New Zealand with 1 minor document signed by the White House and 3 major documents signed by the mafia, but all signed within the White House.
Greg, in the few minutes we have remaining, could you tell us what to expect for the next few years? Tell us how you see things moving forward in world history.
Well, we're living in a non-reality at the moment. I think that's a good wake-up call, because people can actually see what they have contributed, right? And Queen Elizabeth II has contributed absolutely nothing to the United Kingdom whatsoever. And because she is not the Queen of the United Kingdom, not the Queen of England, not the Queen of Great Britain, not the Queen of the people, and not the Queen of the land, but she is perhaps the Queen of swans and dolphins, but that's irrelevant. Queen Elizabeth II cannot claim the United Kingdom out of Europe in Brexit because she's not the sovereign. Now, if she was a sovereign, like say me, I would say, I'm the sovereign entity of the United Kingdom. I'm claiming the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, or Great Britain and all Ireland, out of the European Union. We're a sovereign nation, let the chips fall where they may. Now, Elizabeth can't do that because she's not the sovereign, and she's not the daughter of King George VI, and not the granddaughter of King George V, etc. And she's got 4 children to 3 different fathers, and 2 of them are illegitimate, and 3 of them are pedophiles. And the husband's a pedophile as well. So Elizabeth has had to stand Prince Philip down because he's a pedophile and blurt stuff out. So what that means is the Queen is obviously not the Queen of the United Kingdom. She's not a sovereign entity. And the reason Brexit has been delayed for 2 to 3 years now is so that the British people will get it locked into their heads that Elizabeth is not the sovereign, right? And it's taking 2.5 years for them to realise that Elizabeth is not the sovereign, can't get the UK out of the EU.
And as a final comment, what's your sense of the emergence of the new PM, Boris Johnson, and his prospects? He seems to remind many here of Donald Trump.
Yeah. Now, what we've had is a chain of command from Tony Blair to Gordon Brown to David Cameron to Theresa May. Right now, each of those prime ministers has selected the next prime minister to ensure that the next prime minister does not do a good job and show them up to be entirely useless prime ministers. Right. So now we've got Theresa May, who's mafia, who's just a total mess. She burnt down Grenfell Tower, did the London Bridge attack, did the Westminster Bridge attack, did the Manchester Arena bombing, all to her own profit.
All of which were totally fabricated, by the way.
Totally fabricated. And she also did the mass immigration where she tried to pass off sub-Saharan blacks as Syrians, right? So just complete fraudster, just lies through teeth, lies. The question is, did Theresa May select Boris Johnson to do a worse job than she has?
Greg, I always love having conversations with you. You've done a super job of burnishing your credentials as the most interesting man in the world. I can't thank you enough for coming on The Real Deal with me once again.
Thank you, Jim.